Hello everybody, how are you all doing? Hope you're all doing well. Now in this video I thought we could do some kind of drawing tutorial. I haven't done one of these in a while and a lot of you have been requesting for me to do a video on shading, so that's what I'm going to try and do for you today. Now the thing about shading is there's so many different techniques and methods that I really want to try and tackle each one of them individually in their own video, because this way it's easier for me to show a better example of each one, and also it should be easier for you to follow along and learn it as well. So in this one we're going to take a look at contour shading. It's a technique that I use quite often when drawing, and it's also really useful for showing the form of an object, like this apple for instance. But before we get into it, it would be useful if you have an understanding of how pencil grades work. Of course, your boy has done a video for that, so I'll put a link in the cards now. Go have a look at that if you need to, and then come back to this video. So back to the subject at hand. Contour shading is a technique that we use where we follow the contours, which is essentially just the outlines and form of an object. So again, take this apple for example. It's spherical, has a nice round smooth form to it, so it's a good place for us to start. So let's begin by outlining the apple here, and it's only going to be a simple basic outline. There's really not a sense of it being three-dimensional at this stage. I'm really just trying to capture the shape and the contours of the object. We will be coming in and out of time-lapse throughout this video just to make it more practical. But now that we have our outline, you can see it's more of a top-down view of the apple because my eye level is above looking down. Now before we get into the shading, we need to take time to study the object a little bit more. So here you can see the apple is in front of me. It's always good to recognise the light source, so where the light will come in and bounce off the apple. Look at the shadow, how that merges into the shape. I have the light coming from behind here, so we have a lot of light reflecting from the top of the apple. So finally, once we have an idea of what it is we are actually drawing in regards to the shadow and the light, we can jump straight into the shading. Now I always start off with the light shades first, so that way it's easier to work on top of them and make them darker if needs be. So I'm going to start by using a 2H pencil and lay down this first layer. Really focus on the motion of the pencil here. We are drawing a three-dimensional sphere, so keep that form in your head and try to duplicate similar movements with your hand. You can see how I always follow the contours and the form of the apple. This is essentially just contour shading. Although we are in time lapse, you can see how I'm bringing the pencil back and forth, applying the same amount of pressure onto the paper, because at this moment I'm only creating the lighter shades. When it comes to shading, I always like to work in layers, and what I mean by that is I always start with the lighter shades and gradually lay down darker shades using the softer pencils. Okay, so quick side note, the basic practice of shading in something simple like a circle or a sphere is one of the best exercises to get your head around shading. Because the object doesn't have any harsh edges and it's really just a smooth gradual form, you can carry across what you learn in that exercise to when you want to draw more complex shapes like the human figure for example. So now it's time to choose a softer pencil to get some darker gradients. Here I'm working with a 2B, a pencil grade that I find myself using quite frequently, and then I'm just staying with the form of the object, continuing the same methods that we did previously. Keep referring to the subject you are drawing, how it interacts with the light and shadow, also how it appears in terms of form and shape, and try and recreate that in your drawing. I'm darkening the side of the apple because our light source is on the other side and making contact with the shape. Shading is really this idea of communicating how light interacts with an object, and as a result creates shadows and highlights. I'm keeping my pencil lines all in one direction, following that spherical form. There's really no need to create different lines as of yet. So even with these darker pencil shades down, you can still see how I've kept within the contours and the form of the object. Now I'm just going to blend this a little bit because the lines that I have created are too obvious at the minute and it needs to be smoothed out more. And then I'm taking an even softer 6B pencil to really make those shadows stand out and contrast with the lighter areas. So in terms of the drawing and what you're actually seeing on screen, it might appear as if I'm jumping forward a little bit, but at this stage all I have really done is repeated the same process but with different layers of darker pencils. This really helps emphasise those shadows that are on the front of the apple. So now I'm putting in some highlights using an eraser. I'm using a micro eraser here, so all the equipment I use is in the description. As I'm making these highlights, I'm also focusing on creating a bit of texture. For instance, I'm using my pencil to create extra marks and details that I can see from looking at the apple. And I mean, at this point you don't really have to stick to the contours of the shape because we are just adding texture. The drawing looks a lot darker on the second camera, the way it picks up the pencil, but you can really start to see the realism coming through now. I could probably finish this off by darkening the shadows a little bit more, but I hope this has given you a simple example of contour shading. So I know that some of you watching might already be experienced with this kind of basic stuff, so now I'm going to try and show you how you can apply the same technique to more complex shapes and forms. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and do a quick sketch of my hand, and I'm actually just staring at my left hand here for the reference. So again, approaching this in the same way as that lovely apple we had just drawn. Start with the lighter shades. We need to understand that our hand, our fingers are round. There's really no edges or sharp contours, so by looking at the outline and my own hand, I know that I have to shade in regards to the form of the subject being the hand obviously. So I'm just basically creating a curved motion with the pencil to try and represent that form of my hand and the fingers. But right now I'm just looking at my hand and seeing the shadows. Again, it's in the exact same lighting conditions as the apple, with the main light source being from the front. The fingers on this drawing are arched upwards, so there will be slight shadowing on one side. I like to start around the edges and almost wrap the shading lines around the form of the hand and the fingers. Obviously you still need to give attention to the details on the hand, like the creases between the areas of the fingers and the lines on the skin. If I was going all realistic with this drawing, I'd be putting a lot of effort into the texture. By the way, I'm not going to realistically render this drawing, it's more or less just a quick freehand sketch to show you how I would go about adding contour shading. I guess overall, this whole contour shading technique is really useful for exaggerating an idea of form on a 2D outline drawing like this. Now naturally you would combine this method with other shading techniques which are appropriate, and I'll hopefully be covering a lot more of them in the future videos. But I mean, even if this technique was only used a little bit and it was in the end quite subtle, it can still really have a great effect in putting more life into the object you are drawing. So now that this sketch is done, you can see where I have shaded in areas in regards to the form of the hand and the fingers, how my lines have been curved around the shapes of the hand, and that gives it that more three-dimensional appearance. And that pretty much concludes this further example. And there you go, contour shading. It's definitely one of them techniques that I find myself using quite often when I'm drawing. Hopefully you found it useful as well. If you did enjoy the video, please give it a like, subscribe to keep up to date because I'll be doing a lot more tutorials on shading in the future as well. Other than that, have yourself a great day and I will see you in the next video.